First off, thanks, Labid. These circumstances are always challenging, no matter how you slice them. And so it's always important to have people in the community who are engaged and active and get the ball rolling in the right direction. I've had an opportunity to kind of look in on your WhatsApp group and read some convos and um, hopefully better understand the sort of commonality and the common things that people are discussing. I think one of the things that you can always take solace in is that, um, we are far more alike than we are different. And so whether it's Altadena or the Palisades or Louisville, Colorado, Marshall Fire or Hurricane Helene, um, you're experiencing the same questions that other people asked in similar circumstances, or the Western Kentucky tornadoes where I'm from. So I'm a guy that's from Louisville, Kentucky, or really from a small town in Western Kentucky. But Louisville is where I reside primarily, where I have a wife and three daughters, all under the age of 6. And so my wife is holding down the fort as she has for all of our marriage, and making sure that everybody back home is good. But my entire career has been in disaster recovery. And I frankly just stumbled into it, honestly. I graduated from University of Louisville with an accounting degree, and found myself at a small family office in Nashville, Tennessee. And so you mentioned ServPro. ServPro is actually headquartered in Gallatin, Tennessee. And I know someone who's on their board of directors and know a number of executives who have worked there for a long time. And so um, the world is small. Service Master Restore, if you've seen those trucks around, they're based in Memphis.
Yep.
See. And so, so the restoration community is actually relatively small. And we'll talk a little bit about like how um, being embedded in the industry has come to influence my ability to navigate it quite well. I think I've spent most of my time as an accountant, but then became a technical founder of a few tech companies in the space. WeatherCheck I built. We sold that to an insurance carrier, and then Captain, which I then most recently sold to a hedge fund. In my career, I think I've raised roughly about $148 million in total between debt and equity capital. Have had the opportunity to spend some time before in California. I was here for the 2018 Woolsey fire, and then my wife and I owned a place in San Francisco while one of my companies was admitted into Y Combinator, which is an accelerator in Palo Alto. And um, we're fond of your great state, and really excited to be here. Um, how did I arrive here in Altadena? Well, you know, um, I had sold my company and on December 31st was my last day, and the wildfires happened, and I was sitting in my home in Kentucky yelling at the television, like they're not telling them all of the things.
Mhm.
And I was exclaiming to my wife, and she finally said, "Well, why don't you go out there and see if you can't help?" And so just like a good wife should, she kicked me out and said, "Go do some work." And so, and everything up to this point has frankly just been serendipity. I asked a friend where I should stay, and they said, "Well, you should probably take a look at the Level hotels in downtown LA." And the Level, ironically, had been having challenges with the number of survivors who were coming inbound to their property. They did not have a mechanism for handling um, insurance as payer scenarios, as well as
Wow.
FEMA voucher system. And so
Oh,
um, they then said, "Hey, Demetrius, you seem to know a lot about this. We'd like to hire you to not only help us, but also help the number of families that are housed here." And so today there's 71 families housed at the level on
Wow.
at 7th and Olive. And then we're also working to onboard another 700 units that are fully furnished, by the way, or will be fully furnished, 1 to 3 bedroom apartments for folks in their long-term housing needs as we continue to move forward. So that sort of just happened. And I think the second day I got here, so around
Wow.
January the 15th. And then I just started donating at donation centers and sort of saying, how can I be helpful? Um, and use the knowledge that I've accumulated over the years. And so, the area of my focus is in the long-term rebuilding process, and really specifically focused across really 3 categories of information. So, government as payer, which means like anything FEMA, SBA, frankly, the 17 agencies that support the disaster relief effort within the federal government, and then how that trickles down into the state and local government, and particularly what we as citizens need to be asking of our local elected officials to help us get what we need. Um, and then secondarily, insurance obviously being a thing. Most of my career, I have not been a public adjuster, although my companies have been involved in insurance claims my entire career. Um, Partly, I hold the adjuster's license because those are the only people who are licensed to have a conversation about coverage. And so um, I'm happy to do that and have done it really successfully. Part of my expertise is related to the performance of insurance claims in general. Part of that $100 million in debt that I raised was so that we could fund insurance claims on behalf of contractors who were doing the work. Um, and so it's really, that's the lens that I look through. And so my career has allowed me to interact directly with a lot of insurance executives, chief claims officers from roughly about a third of the 3,400 property and casualty insurance carriers throughout the country. And so you can obviously read about the stuff that I've done in carrier management and stuff like that. But I'm kind of an insurance nerd. And then finally construction management. So there's always been a nexus of, what does it mean to rebuild under these circumstances? While it may look like it's a normal, there's certainly nothing normal about the level of devastation that you're seeing, but like just even the conventional wisdom of what's happening after a disaster within the construction community, and understanding how to navigate that well, because there are certainly stresses and strains that are being placed on contractors um, that you'll even see exacerbated in the days and weeks ahead. And months. And so, how do you deal with that? How do you address that? Um, I think the largest construction project that I've worked on is probably about $40 million, and have done roughly thousands of rebuilds. I think in the most recent company, we financed about 5,000 projects. Yeah, it's all good stuff. So that's me in a nutshell. And, I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you guys have.
That's great. Thank you. That gives us a really good broad overview. And actually, just to get us started, we are getting some questions right now. But just to get us started, I'm very curious because you said this, you were yelling things at the TV. What were you yelling?
Well, not anything that I should repeat. Um,
You can give us the G-rated version.
right. Not anything I should repeat. But it was in part because there's, I understand why local officials were hesitant to be more explicit
Mm,
about what the nature of the recovery will be. Um, but I think it's just helpful to give it to people straight, um, and be clear and concise. And so um, part of what you learn in disaster related communication is to be really plain speaking. or really plain spoken in your delivery so that people get it, because whether you realize it or not, the trauma of the moment is really clear. And it's had somebody tell me, it's like, it's really annoying that people keep telling me that I'm traumatized. Um, um, but it is also to really be practical and say, here's how it shows up. Um, like even the electeds are even dealing with their own version of trauma, right? Seeing a community that they represent devastated, and feeling like they need to give you an answer, but really aren't sure exactly what to say. And so it really is to sort of level set expectations, right? Which is to say, hey, this actually takes a long time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And what you're going to experience in the immediate days is like, um, you know, this feel like you're going to feel a desire to make a decision right away. When in reality, you probably need to take a breath and sort of, okay, now, and be deliberate in your actions. So, like the number of people that I've encountered where they're having to cancel contracts that they signed within the first 20 days, um,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
is really challenging, right? And then, but that makes them even more afraid to make the next decision. And so, where I typically begin, even in Q&As, is like, you know, if you don't already have and this is an exercise, sit down and writing out what is my decision making framework, like what matters to me in this process, like how am I going to decide? How am I going to know that I made a good decision? Really, really important work to do in the early days so that as you have questions and you answer them, um, you'll be able to sort of center yourself on, okay, I made a good decision because I did all of these things. I checked all of these boxes in my own decision-making framework, right? Hey, you know, what my kids want is really, really important. And I've evaluated that, and this is in their best interest, right? Those sort of things. And those are always unique to the individual household. So, um, that's what I was yelling is like, hey, here's how you get there in a very real, tangible way, not this sort of pie in the sky.
Nebulous.
Yeah.
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 No, that's true. Thank you for giving us that insight. So I'm just going to start. I actually have I'm going to start with a question first in chat. I have a holdover question from the WhatsApp group, but it's from Lai James. It says, my insurance adjuster thinks that everything can be cleaned, even countertop appliances, coffee machine, toaster, etc. Servpro already confirmed that pretty much everything inside needs to be tossed. I'm in the burn area next to burn houses. How to approach insurance company to get them to approve my items in my house to be a total loss. He happens to be with State Farm.
Yeah. So part of this, um, the advantage here is you want to get with somebody who is probably representing other claimants of the same carrier. Because one of the strategic approaches, or you can do this yourself, go find somebody who also has State Farm where they've responded differently, right? Hey, so that
Oh,
question you ask out publicly in some of these forums, hey, has anybody had all of their contents replaced by State Farm?
then
Right.
you know what the approvals process is going to be like.
Yeah. And so then your communication back to State Farm looks something like this. Hey, State Farm, my friend at X address on this claim, you've replaced all of their contents. Why aren't you doing so in this instance? Right? Because that's actually one of the tests that you use to establish a bad faith behavior on the part
Oh,
of a carrier is are you is there a difference in how you're treating insureds, right? You did one thing for one insured, but you did something completely different under the same circumstances for another insured. And so if I were in your position, I'd be looking for some data point that would allow me to establish that, hey, no, 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 this isn't your normal pattern in practice, right? And then the other thing that you can do is get the ServPro contractor that came to put their recommendation in writing and submit that to the carrier, right? It might take some corroboration. So, State Farm may say, well, we really don't like that recommendation. Okay, I've seen instances where they go out and get another recommendation to try and satiate their own what they want to do on a particular project. And so that would be my preliminary advice. Of course, not knowing whether or not you've got a PA or got, other things going on. But yeah, that's where I would start.
And Lai, just so if you have a follow-up question, go right ahead. But I have a follow-up question actually based off of that. So I don't have State Farm, I have USAA. But with regards to getting people, that seems like that's one technique to get insurance to approve something for remediation. I have been hearing a lot about testing and then getting the insurance to approve it based on that. How effective do you feel that is, when you're testing for items in a house that could be toxic?
Well, a lot of policies strictly prohibit testing, but what I'll tell you is that I lean more toward contractor selection on the
Mm.
testing question, which is um, you want to find a remediation firm that actually includes the testing, right?
Ah,
Because ServPro is the approved vendor, they don't include it, but it doesn't mean that other vendors don't include the testing in their remediation, right? And so bundling the testing is the way that I would approach dealing with like the need for testing in that process. And frankly, and the other way to do this well is because in this market, testing can be quite expensive given the demand. I have historically used outside testing firms, normally East Coast testing firms, because the difference is probably 30% cheaper, but a $40 upfront cost, meaning that you have to just ship your samples. Right. So like that's the point of distinction. Now they're going to ask for more samples than because they need to actually establish a baseline because people sometimes contaminate their own samples. So uh,
oh, interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
so you what you do is you then, you know, somebody like me, I have collected them before for property owners. And so good example is McCoy and McCoy. They're based in Kentucky and have a few locations around the country. Um, and so that's the approach that I generally take.
And let me chime in for a second. So this is something that Demetrius and I spoke to earlier, and I found a local mom and pop sort of cleaning remediation company that did not include testing, but I asked them if they would bundle. So Demetrius knows testing facilities on the East Coast. And so he said, I was inspired by you, Demetrius, to just ask this company that did not have testing. I said, look, can you build in the testing cost into your bid so that, we are independently finding the lab that we want so that we get the results that we want that serve us, not an insurance company
Yeah,
or a remediation company. And so they had never done that before, but then my guy asked his boss, and his boss was willing to do that,
yeah,
right? Willing to bundle in a third party testing company, lab company that we brought to the table to
that's
then
right.
be built in, even though they didn't do it. So again, that I learned from you, Demetrius, to ask for that. And let's see now if Mercury will approve it. But I want to go a step back, and this is just from a organizational standpoint, right, Serena? I have not seen maybe one area, but I have not seen groups of people organized by insurance company, right? To Demetrius's point, if the same carrier citizens are know who each other are, I know there's conversations, but there's not categories. Hey, here's Allstate, Farmers, Mercury, and then you
Yeah,
got your
here's the
neighbors.
thing, Labid, I'd even hop in. I would say, look, you guys should be publishing your documents across one another. Like it's there's no love lost. There's not really any secret. They're all in Exactimate, right? Um, I would be publishing and sharing because that level of difference and those small differences between those different coverages within the same carrier is a really great way to use as a great thing to use as basis for, hey, look what you did on this particular claim right here. and you're really playing to the carrier's disadvantage because they're not oftentimes looking at what's being done in aggregate, right? Like your claim is being
Oh,
processed within Dallas or it's being processed within Phoenix or,
oh,
whatever
interesting.
those
Yeah.
claim centers are. And so what sometimes is happening is you might be getting some difference in just departments, like regional claims offices that are handling your claim versus somebody else is handling another, right? And State Farm's a big organization as an example. And so it happens a lot.
Oh, that's interesting. So I will say that there is a Facebook group called Structures Intact that has split out chat rooms for different insurance companies, but that's not happening right now. I haven't seen any documents being shared in those groups. So that's something that we're going to definitely encourage in our group on WhatsApp because that seems incredibly helpful. By the way, I just want to mention that's also a healthcare technique, FYI, as well. Um,
Right? Yeah.
yeah. So that's good to know because right now, so I'm just gonna fully tell everybody on the call. So my house did make it, my garage did not. Everything else burned around my house, and I have both fire and smoke damage on my house. But unlike other people, I have a rare disease. So going back into the debris is a huge problem for me, even if it's in the area. So trying to figure out testing, trying to figure out safety from my perspective is a very serious thing. Um, and one thing I have noticed is that they are only testing, at least my insurance company is doing this. I have heard that a couple others are doing this. They're not doing a lot of pre-testing. They're only doing post-testing if you're requesting it. And you have to request exactly which tests you want, which also makes it a little complicated for us because we're like, okay, well, which
Right.
tests are these?
Yeah.
Um, so that that is very helpful. I have another question that came up actually in the WhatsApp group. This person said that they're trying to understand safety for their home plumbing system. Do you think this is something that you can answer? They said that my plumbing is old and I'm very concerned that even after the water system is deemed safe, again, my home water will remain contaminated because of things being stuck in my pipes. I don't understand the chemistry behind all this. Thank you. So
Mm,
yeah, that's interesting because I also have questions about that with regard to like electrical. Because I know most people's gas things totally burned off. My meter burned off, but not the entire
okay.
gas.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the contaminants that you would be concerned with are actually on the public utility side,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Um, the to the extent like I would say that like I would be most concerned is in these instances where there is a like you're in your home's intact, but you're not under any sort of boil advisory. But your water is being, you know, supplied to you by a utility that's impacted. That's where I would spend my time focused if I were going to try to address water related issues. I don't think there's any without knowing more about your specific plumbing system, I don't think there's any specific concern as it relates to um, PVC or flex tubing or copper or steel per se, because there's not any sort of like obviously sulfur isn't is acid backed, but on the pH scale, but I don't necessarily think that there's any reason to worry about um, any contaminants within the system itself. But it it depends on your system, right? And so what I'd want to see is I'd want to look at um, what that plumbing system when if you have your plans, what the mechanical side of the plans looks like, if you have those, and then if you don't have those, I would basically have um, mechanical sketches done, which can be a little costly, but it would at least answer the question if there were any areas within the system itself where you might have negative flow, which means water standing within your plumbing system. But it's not common. I mean, it's most of these systems are engineered so that that doesn't happen. So, but the reason why I'm saying it with an asterisk is because of the age of some of the homes within the footprint, right? So, without knowing exactly, I might be concerned about this if I had a historic home as an example, right?
Oh, uh-huh.
Um, but I wouldn't be concerned if I had a home built after 1950,
Oh, okay.
right?
That's good to know. That
So,
kind of like
so
cut off time.
yeah. Like it's like that level of nuance. You're like, you shouldn't be concerned about asbestos after 1972, right?
Hmm.
Um, like so those are just like there's like really clear dates and times in which construction materially changes from an architectural and code perspective. Um, and that's where I'd focus. But I would say like, water purification and mitigation measures. I think that's something to think about for every single person who has a home that's still standing. If you've not applied to the SBA, you should apply. Why? Because you need to probably put mitigation measures into your house, right? Water
Mm.
filtration, right? Things of that nature, because and water is actually one of those things, right? Most people don't think about this, but like, hey, putting a whole home purification system in your house is probably not a bad idea at this particular moment, right? Um, and so SBA dollars can be used for that purpose, just so you're all aware.
Oh, that's really interesting. So since I'm just gonna go ahead and go actually into SBA questions right now since we just started into that. I know because we recently did apply for an SBA loan. We got approved for two loans, a small one and a big one. And right now we're actually still unsure what we should be thinking about using those types of loans for. And you just mentioned one of those reasons. Are there other reasons to be used? Like, are there other kind of planning
And
reasons we should be
let
using?
me be clear. What I just mentioned is above and beyond the loan amount that you have probably received, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because
Uh-huh.
because what I just referenced is what's called hazard mitigation,
Okay.
right? So there's a separate pool of dollars within the SBA specifically for hazard mitigation. And here's why, like, and this isn't to toot my own horn. Here's why what I do matters. It's because bridging all these things together into a nice, cohesive, like sort of thing matters. Because so let's say you're planning to rebuild your house. Your builder needs to actually um, break apart their construction plan to pull out the hazard mitigation elements so that then that can be substantiated to the SBA,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
That's
Uh-huh.
how you get those funds. And so there are these little technical nuances, the tactical things that you need to know to ask for so that it goes smoothly and you receive the maximum benefit under all of these different programs. And so so when you think about these different programs that you're dealing with, whether it's economic injury through the SBA or the homeowner's property or the renter's property, or I'm missing one of them, homeowners, renters, nonprofits. Um, so like those all have their own specific requirements as it relates to the sort of collateral, but I would be very careful that anything that's in addition to like an improvement that's being made, you really want to carve that out in terms of dollars, right? So the first amount of money, really think about that as my previous structure, right? So this money is just be spent on building what I had. And then if there's other improvements that you want to make, then there are other programs or sort of like attachments that you can do to SBA at the SBA to help support those other items. And so um, fire retardant building products, right?
Wow.
As a
Hmm.
difference. So like what you do is you scope the work for the bricks that you had, right? And let's say that there's a 30% increase in the fire retardant material. Well, then your loan can be increased based on the additional cost of the hazard mitigation nature of fire retardant materials, right?
Oh, wow.
And so that's how you kind of have to think about it. You sort of think, because what the initial dollars for the homeowner's property, you can't have any betterment effectively. And betterment is just like, hey, you can't be any better off than what you were before. But there are other programs where that's not the case, right? And so that these are entirely about, giving you sort of improvements to make your life better and safer and more resilient.
Yeah, because that is a huge question for a lot of us now. On my case, it's a little bit different because the main structure of my house is still there, but a lot of people are wondering, hey, what do I do to make my home more fire resilient
Hmm.
when the insurance is gonna not cover that?
Yeah.
So that is a problem.
Well, that's certainly the SBA, and some of this will become more clear as you um, get into the actual um, rebuild and planning process of your actual construction itself. But I think the sort of core thing to say right now is that everybody needs to apply, even if like it's there's no question, apply, right? And hopefully everybody's been beating that drum that um, apply, apply, apply. I don't, even if it feels like you don't need it, whatever, apply.
Apply. Okay. No, no, actually, people have not been beating that drum. So thank you for saying
Yes.
that.
You don't think you need FEMA? Apply. You don't think you need SBA? Apply.
Apply.
Because because the way that these programs are structured, just so you're clear, they're all governed by one law. It's called the Stafford Act. And the Stafford Act basically says that you have a limited window to sort of basically raise your hand, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take the proceeds. But if you don't apply, you can never appeal. If you don't apply, you can't go in reverse. But if you have applied, then there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do in having the conversation, right?
Oh,
Right. It just puts your name on the page effectively. And so that's how you can kind of think about like when in a lot of these agencies, folks are like, hey, you should apply. That's really what they're saying. There's a distinction between um, applying and having to take the money, right? It doesn't just because you apply doesn't mean that you have to take the money.
yeah. No, that's really good to know because it gives you options essentially
That's exactly right.
when you apply. Okay.
So I
That's
think the
that's
SBA deadline is March the 10th. And so,
yes, I believe it is.
all right.
Okay, so I think a good place to go right now would be when it comes originally when you were doing your intro, you talked about um, keywords to use in certain circumstances. Can you address that with regards to insurance? What other, I know you just said hazard mitigation, but do you have some other phrases that you utilize when dealing with insurance?
Well, I think it's not necessarily phrases, but lines of questioning, right?
Okay.
So you're getting rebuffed by your insurance company, right? Hey, you want additional living expenses, and they're only willing to give you a certain amount of money. Okay, but you've read your policy and you're like, wow, well, my policy says that it's a certain dollar value of another limit, 15%, and it can't go more than 12 months. Okay. And so they're telling you, hey, we're only going to pay you out a month at a time, right? So the line of questioning is, okay, I hear you. Where did you provide me notice that that was the case,
Ooh.
right? Because insurance contracts are what are called contracts of adhesion. When you bought the policy, you didn't get to negotiate any of the terms. And so the onus is always on your carrier to have communicated to you,
Oh, interesting.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so the moment in which you say like and even the interpretation of the rule, that line item for additional living expenses, loss of use, however it's termed in your policy, um, it's interpreted, the court actually looks at it in how you interpret it.
Oh,
Right. Right. Like, yeah. That's why people say most insurance companies go to court and they lose, because it's a unilateral contract. It means that they're on the most knowledgeable side. You really know little to nothing about
mm-hmm.
what's being offered to you. And the court acknowledges that. And so the line of questioning that you ask is, okay, it's fine if that's the policy. Where in the policy did you tell me that I could only receive 1 month at a time?
Oh, mm-hmm.
And so that's the line of questioning that I most often use. And it's a highly effective way to get them to go ahead and pay, because there is no evidence. There is no, they didn't communicate, right? And so they're just giving you a policy that somebody made up, that, hey, this is the way that we're going to do it within the insurance company. And the truth of the matter is that, no, I've lost my house. I want the entirety of my 15% of this other limit right now. Thank you. Right. Oh, you need
Ah,
basis or you need justification. Okay, well, I'll comply with giving you whatever justification you need. Maybe it's a 12-month lease, maybe it's a whatever it might be. But this sort of paying it out to me as it doesn't even make any sense, right? And so you just got to be a little forceful. This is the area where adjusters play, public adjusters in particular. But it really, to some degree, you can do some of this on your own. For me in particular, I tend to um, engage folks first as an owner's rep, because it's not always true that they're going to need the negotiation or, the really knockdown, drag out stuff with a carrier. Um,
yeah.
it's sometimes more so like doing what we've done with Labid and sort of saying, hey, here's here's the words, right? Here's what you ought to be saying. Hey, here's I looked at this estimate, here are the line items. Here's what I would blend between the two, right? Here's what you should do. Go back and talk to the contractor who you got that estimate from and ask him to do it this way instead, right? All of those things start to matter and will help you, down the road. And then like even this, like I think Labit, you've asked me questions like, hey, is that legitimate? Is that the right amount? And I'm like, um, and I'm like, I I think the answer is yes. And I think the thing that you again got to remember, I know some of it can feel pretty foreign, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost $50,000 to remediate smoke out of my house. And the answer is, under these circumstances, yes. And the circumstances are, hey, there are 10,600 some odd structures that were destroyed and another 30,000 that are smoke damaged at one time. Um, you know, that means that demand is going to be high. Remembering that your insurance is estimated the technical term is inelastically, meaning that it's intentionally higher to accommodate for the fact that there is this level of demand typically. So whether you're living in the Midwest and you're subject to a hail and windstorm, or you're in Tampa, Florida, and are affected by a hurricane, it's always the same sort of payment structure, and so that's why the numbers are so high.
Oh, okay. That's really helpful. Thank you for that. I did get a question while we were talking. And the question is it okay to accept an SBA loan and the lien on my property before the insurer has paid for coverage? Meaning, will the insurer pay SBA first as if it's a mortgage lender?
Mm, um, That's a really good question. I think it is okay, but I would want to verify because I don't think, no, the SBA is not going to take out the mortgage lender at all. They're not going to, that the onus to do that is entirely upon you. Um, but they will sit in a second or third lien position. And I think if I remember the documents correctly, I think it is a third lien position. Um,
What is a third lien position, just for those of us who don't know anything about this? Because I did see that on the higher amount that they had given us.
yeah, so um, just simply put, like your mortgage company sits in the first position typically if you have a mortgage. If you don't, congratulations. Um, and then in some cases, like a home equity line of credit would sit in the second uh,
Okay.
lien position. And the third is kind of like a hanging chad. It's like, um, it's the uh, lonely creditor. It can be done. You can actually have more than three, um, but a lot of times, like forgivable loans sit in three. Um, Government will take three because they really don't want to be an impediment to one and two, right?
Oh, interesting. Uh-huh.
And so, and this is why a lot of people have been in the conversation in the government lending community is whether or not these SBA loans will actually ever be fully collected, right? Because that there may be that Congress may come back later and simply forgive them because of the nature of how they sit on the titles.
Oh, that's really good to know. I have another question. We're renters and our house was destroyed. We are currently staying with family that owns their house. Since we're taking up most of their house, we want to begin paying them rent that is comparable to the neighborhood. How does loss of use insurance work? Do we write up a lease agreement? Does the payment go directly to us? Then we pay them? I know they told us the payment is what the current lease agreement is minus what we were paying before the fire.
Mm, I would that's another one where I'd make sure I'd read the policy.
Ah, okay. So that's
Uh,
policy specific.
yeah, the policy is not going to cover what you need to do and how you need to substantiate it, but a lease agreement would is a good way to do it, right? And so I mean, I would do like the standard California one page lease sort of deal. And I think you can get that off of the California Housing Department's website. Um, and and that's what I would execute and send into the carrier. Hey, I've entered into a 12-month
A
lease,
lease agreement.
and here's now I would you have some autonomy here, and some flexibility. I would price the lease accordingly, right? Based on whatever that policy says, right? So that you could maximize your recoveries, right? And so that's how I would approach it is um, it's very rare to see a calculation like the one described in the question within a policy. But given that it is a renter's policy, it may be a little bit different. It'd be helpful to know who the carrier was.
Yeah, feel free to tell us who the carrier was if you feel comfortable. The other kind of the question that was buried in there too was does the payment go directly to us or does it go to the person that they're leasing from,
Typically, it will go to the landlord.
the landlord?
Typically, it'll go to the landlord, but I've seen scenarios where certainly like the landlord is friendly and the landlord signs the check back over to the insured person.
Ah, okay.
If
Um,
it's like loss of use to like a hotel, that is typically remitted directly to the to
the
the
hotel. Okay, that makes sense. All right, another question. What if you were not a renter but need to pay rent now in a friend's place where you take up most of the space?
You are not a renter, you are a renter now.
Yeah, I guess that's the same position that I'm in. So I own my home. Now I'm a renter in actually my friend's home. Um, and I guess could you clarify when you say when you need to take up most of the space, do you mean, Korean, do you mean that it, like, do you adjust the rent accordingly because you're taking up most of their space?
Oh, prorate the rent. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, I think it's sort of the same answer to from the previous question, which is like enter into a lease agreement, and decide what that rent value is that um that would be expected. It needs to be market rate, right? And so that's how I would think about it. But frankly, there's not a lot of scrutiny on like, oh, well, is someone else living in the house with you? And like nobody's looking, and nobody's coming to your door and going to ask you either. So, I would sort of say, and it's just frankly not a consideration, like whether or not it's someone else's house, because of the nature of the contract that you signed, right? The the contract itself, it, once the coverage is bound, the carrier owes it, regardless to what the set of circumstances are in which you're using it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. I do know while we're waiting for any more questions that kind of pop up, I do know of another question that I had from my neighbor. This is the thing they are struggling with right now. They've been dealing with construction companies because their house was a total loss. And what they're trying to figure out is they can't book any companies because they don't know the timeline of the FEMA cleanup. So how do you usually see people navigate that?
Yeah, I would say that they need to be engaging professional services at this point, not general contractors.
Okay. And so when you say professional services, what kind of goes under
Engineers,
that? Engineers?
architects, design build firms are really great in this set of
Okay.
circumstances, meaning that they will design it and they will build it. And so they tend to what's very common in that scenario is that there's normally a drafter who's on that team, or part of those organizations who can help you get to plans and that sort of thing. But I would not be in the market for a builder per se just yet,
Okay.
for the very reason that the challenge that was outlined, which is like, oh, you can't really do. Now, what I have seen is I've seen people doing contingent build contracts that have some retainer associated with them. Um,
Oh,
I don't, I wouldn't advise that. I think there are going to be plenty of builders who are highly capable. Um, I would not be shocked if you encounter builders who have California licenses but are from other states. Um, the scope and scale of this is so large that it's not going to be physically possible for everyone to
oh,
use a California builder.
oh,
Um,
that makes sense.
and so part of what I try to do is work with people to understand here's how you choose under the set of circumstances where um hey, I can't find a hyper local builder anymore. Um and so and does that there are a lot of things that you can do to help mitigate the risk in that process. And so we would walk through that. And that's specific. There's some very, very specific ways, like in terms of poor workmanship and how you address that and the ways and mechanisms and things you can ask them for that help you mitigate that. So here's a quick little tip. So if you've hired a contractor, you should ask them to list you as an additional insured on their insurance policy, right? You might be
Oh,
asking for the certificate, right? Hey, are you insured? Are you bonded? That's not good enough in this scenario. You ask them, hey, I want to be listed as an additional insured. And if you really are skeptical, you might even go, I also want to be a loss payee, right? And so what this does is that additional insured allows for you to pick up the phone and call their insurance company and file your own claim against them.
Oh,
If you just are a certificate holder, you can't do anything, right? But being an additional insured under the policy allows you to pick up the phone and file your claim for whatever you think the issue is.
wow. Yep. That's something I had no idea
Yeah.
because I
Yeah,
am going to have to do that since we have to rebuild the garage.
that's right. That's right. So it's not a unique request. A lot of contractors having to do it for bigger firms that they're working for. Um,
Oh, okay.
but the average consumer doesn't even know that they can ask. And so that's
Nope.
yeah. So and it's and you will see it. It's like it will say on the bottom right, there's a the standard sort of 8.5 by 11 certificate that most contractors will send you. There's in the bottom left-hand corner there, it'll have your name, your address. If it says certificate holder, that's not what you wanted. It should say additional insured, and then it'll have your information below. And what will happen is, like if the coverage lapses, the carrier will send you notice that the coverage lapsed, right? And so that's how you can sort of keep tabs on
Oh.
the contractor and all that good stuff.
Oh, and I'm gonna ask this question really quick just because it's related to what we're talking about. What is the difference between additionally insured and loss payee?
The loss payee means that if they had any losses at all under the policy, right, you would also be on the name of that check,
Wow.
right? Because what can happen is, like, let's say you're dealing with, and the reason I raise this is only because the nature of the construction industry changes in a disaster. Um, because of there being so much demand. Some owners of construction companies see it as a really ripe time to retire, right? So the company that you thought was owned by the same person for 50 years is no longer owned by the same person. A private equity firm has bought them because of this scope and scale of this event, right? That those things happen. Um,
Oh.
and so yeah,
I said '02 when I first heard that.
yeah,
I was like, oh,
yeah, those are
okay.
the things that you're not
And you
really
don't even know
thinking.
it. Private
Yeah,
equity
people don't
buying these
know.
companies, you don't even know it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Whew.
happening right now. People are preparing to buy companies so that they can support the relief effort. Yeah.
Wow.
When I
You
say
may have actually,
support, I think monopolize is probably the right word.
you may or may not have either worked with or know companies who've done that in the past, which is why you also have so much insight and knowledge.
That was my first job, that family office. That's what they would do. They would go in and buy companies.
Let's see.
Now they were better actors than most, but they bought hundreds of roofing companies that way. And so bearing that in mind, and so that's why I always say it's not the same as what you would normally experience. And so some of the conventional wisdom, if you think that I can just go online and Google all the tips and the tricks, it's not advisable because it's not the same as the normal thing. And the other tip and trick is that you need to have a requirement within your any builder contract that they're willing to work with and document every single thing that they do, right? Because some of the things that need to be reimbursed from your carrier, such as codes and ordinances, those sort of provisions, those can only be substantiated if the builder substantiates it with receipts. And
Oh,
so you have to sort
yeah.
of put the two dots together in order to make it work. And so a documentation provision within your builder's contract, within your professional services contracts, is really, really important. And so that's one of the things that I look for when I'm like, oh, who are you hiring again? Okay, let's look through here. Hey, there's no documentation requirement. Like they have to document everything that they've done. And so, um, you know, there's no way to cover every single potential question that you guys might have, but um,
This is a start, and I know we're hitting the
sorry.
hour. To be mindful of
Yeah.
time, uh, is it Lie James, right? Lee or Lie?
Yeah. Uh, Lion and Karina still have one. They both have questions. So
Yeah,
Okay, good.
I'm gonna answer Lies just from my perspective, and Demetrius, please chime in. She's talking about issuing a check directly to ServPro versus her, or yeah, her for remediation process. I will say from my perspective, my insurance company, Mercury, gave it to me, but literally today I have to send it to my lender, Loan Depot, for a second signature. They then send it back to me, and then I cash it, and then I have to report progress with my lender. So
oh,
there's so many different things, but Demetrius, that's the question. Can somebody get the check directly to them versus ServPro for the work?
and I
Well,
have a different scenario too than you, Libby.
there is a way to circumvent your mortgage company, by the way. We need to talk about that one offline. But because it doesn't have to happen that way. But what else? Um, I can't.
So
Did I
Demetrius,
answer that?
can no, so ServPro, so the question is, so X amount of dollars has been approved to ServPro. The insurance company wants to just pay ServPro
Yeah.
directly. Can that money go to the beneficiary of the insurance, the homeowner or the renter directly and not ServPro?
Not if they're going to use ServPro, no.
Right.
No, because ServPro is the preferred vendor. And so, or their, vendor partner. And so they're just going to pay them direct.
Yeah, and
Correct.
in my case, oh, go ahead, Libby.
Well, no, I think in my case, I told them that I was going to hire a third-party company. So they just went ahead and just submit a second opinion. They wouldn't even show me the estimate ServPro gave until I agreed to accept the money.
Hmm.
They're like, oh, here's the estimate for service, and you got to do this. And it's just my experience.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
Wow.
the right answer is to get a second opinion always, in terms of the numbers. I mean, and you saw the price difference, immediately.
ask for the money, right? Say,
Yeah.
I will hire somebody, right? Whether I choose to hire Servpro or not, that's my decision. So send me the money. Is that the right way to say it to the
Yep.
insurance company?
Yep.
Okay,
Karina's
and
question.
yeah, Karina's question. So should I ask for the amount of rent that I could have rented my house for? Because we now are in a more expensive area and a bigger house. So I'm sure they wouldn't pay the full rent of a more expensive house, right?
No, they will because that's it. They don't. It's not. It's not. Most policies aren't that specific. Most policies are like some percentage of another limit up to a certain amount of time, right? And so, frankly, like the only thing that you need to substantiate is that you actually have the loss of use for that period. Now, that's partly why um, the carrier sometimes says, "Oh, well, we want to pay it month to month," because they're not quite sure that you're going to use it the entire time. But in these cases, if you're in a total loss scenario or they should be paying you out the full balance of, what you're owed under the ALE or loss of use anyway. There's no real justifiable reason not to pay it out because like it's not reasonable to believe that you're going to rebuild this house in a year, right?
And that
Oh,
I don't we're extended time. There's a couple things I wanted to just share that I've learned from Demetrius that I think is relevant. But Karina has another question. What if you hire someone other than ServPro? Can you require them to send the money to the homeowner? I think you just tell them, right? Tell them to send it to me. I will make the choice of who I hire,
Yeah,
period. Right.
that's
Okay.
right.
Um, so two things, just sharing. So I know one family, total loss, they got 3 years worth of rental, rental costs up front, and they got their rebuild. Whether they're the right numbers or not, they still got 3 years of rent up front versus the 18 months that is, I guess, regulated by law, right, Demetrius? Which then goes to my second, because that was the moratorium,
Well,
18 months. What was that you were talking about?
the 18-month provision is for FEMA, temporary sheltering assistance and long-term housing assistance. And so, in most policies, you're going to see anywhere from 12 to 24 months worth of loss of use or additional living expense coverage. And so what's happening if you're under a FEMA voucher, because your policy maybe you don't have insurance, or your policy doesn't have loss of use or not enough, then there's a recertification of the temporary sheltering assistance and long-term housing assistance programs that has already been made by your county and multiple cities. I think City of Pasadena and the county have already made that request for an extension beyond 18 months. And so I think it goes from 18 to like 24. And so there will be more, if you're on a FEMA voucher system, there will be more assistance for you than just 18 months. More than likely. I don't think it's been approved yet, but that recertification has already been submitted, is my understanding. I was in a meeting with Mayor Gordo with the City of Pasadena, and he had substantiated that they had already made that request.